Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Carter, and today I want to share a story from my past that still lingers in my mind, bringing with it a mix of pain and regret. Every time I think about it, my heart aches, and I can't help but wonder if things could have turned out differently. It's an experience I wish I had never gone through, but as we all know, life is never simple. This story began many years ago when I was just 19, living with my family in the vibrant city of New York, a place full of charm, but also its own shadows. At the time, I believed I had everything. My family was wealthy, and both my parents were incredibly successful. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video until the end. Trust me, it's going to be an unforgettable journey. Please hit the like button to show your support. My father, Jonathan, was a dedicated businessman, and my mother, Eleanor, was an award-winning architect with impeccable taste. Despite their demanding careers, my parents always made an effort to spend time with me and my two older brothers, Daniel and Ethan. They were 3 years older than me, and if I had to describe them, I would say they were both incredibly handsome and charismatic. I had always been proud to have brothers like them. As the youngest, I was undeniably spoiled by my parents. They made sure I never lacked anything, whether it was material possessions or love. But the truth was, no matter how much my parents cared for me, it never quite compared to the love I received from Daniel and Ethan. They weren't just my brothers, they were my protectors, my closest companions, always there to look after me. What made their love feel so different from my parents was the way they expressed it, not through grand gestures, but through constant, unwavering presence. My parents' love ensured I had a privileged life, but Daniel and Ethan went beyond that. They understood me in ways my parents sometimes couldn't. Whenever I was feeling down, they would sense it, even if I didn't say a word. They were always the first people I turned to when I needed to talk, and they listened without judgment. When I was younger and faced difficulties at school, it was always Daniel and Ethan who stepped in to defend me. I remember one particular instance when my classmates teased me for the outfit I was wearing. I came home in tears, and my brothers immediately noticed my distress. They didn't resort to aggression, but their sharp words and quiet intensity were enough to ensure those classmates never bothered me again. To me, they were heroes, always ready to stand by my side. I cherished our family evenings together, but my favorite place was always between my brothers. They would wrap their arms around me protectively, often playfully arguing over who got to sit next to me. They teased that I was their little princess, and it was their lifelong duty to protect me. As time passed, I began to feel that their love for me was unlike anything else in our family. They guided me through the awkward years of adolescence with patience and care. When I started feeling self-conscious about my looks, Ethan spent time teaching me how to apply makeup, always reminding me that I was beautiful just the way I was. Daniel helped me choose clothes, always calling me the most adorable little sister in the world. Through their affection, they made me feel special, loved, without conditions. In my eyes, my brothers weren't just family. They were my emotional anchor, my safe haven in an ever-changing world. When my parents were busy with work, Daniel and Ethan made sure I was never alone. They took me to school, helped me with my homework, and kept me company. There were nights when I couldn't sleep and I would knock on their doors. They always welcomed me, telling me funny stories or simply sitting with me until I drifted off. Those small gestures made me believe that their love for me was deeper than what I received from my parents. But that love, the love I thought was pure, became the source of my greatest regret. It's a story that would take more time to explain. I'm not sure if anyone will truly understand, but everything that happened when I was 19 completely changed my life. As the youngest in the family, I often did silly things without fear of punishment. Sometimes I would jump into their laps or sit beside them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daniel and Ethan were not only my brothers, but also my closest friends, the people I felt most comfortable with. One warm summer afternoon, I stepped out of my bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the large window, filling the living room with a soft golden glow. Daniel and Ethan were sitting on the sofa, engrossed in a TV show. I had no idea what they were watching, but they both seemed completely focused. As usual, I walked over, rubbing my eyes absent-mindedly. I didn't say anything, just tiptoed closer. Neither of them had noticed me yet. Grinning mischievously, I suddenly jumped onto the sofa, plopping down onto both of their laps. In surprise, Daniel jolted while Ethan laughed. "Little sister, what are you up to now?" Ethan teased. I just giggled, saying nothing as I settled comfortably on their laps, resting my head on Daniel's shoulder. "What are you two watching so intently?" I asked. They didn't answer at first. Then, as I glanced at the TV screen, I realized they were watching a romantic film. At that moment, the movie reached its climax, an emotional scene where the characters embraced passionately and shared a kiss. When Daniel and Ethan noticed I was staring, they quickly became uncomfortable. Ethan smiled awkwardly and covered my eyes. "Don't look, Olivia. This isn't a movie for kids." I laughed, wiggling out of his grasp. "I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 19, I teased. My voice carried a playful tone, but inside I was genuinely intrigued. Despite Ethan's attempts to block my view, I tried to peek through his fingers, still laughing as I teased them. In that moment, I unconsciously shifted my hands to keep my balance on Ethan's lap. I don't know if it was intentional, but my hand brushed against something in his pocket. The sensation, hard and warm, immediately made my heart race. I jerked my hand back, panic rising in my chest. A wave of confusion washed over me, and I couldn't bring myself to look at either Daniel or Ethan. Shame coursed through me, hot and overwhelming. "I'm sorry," I stammered, quickly getting up and running to my room. I slammed the door behind me, pressing my back against it, my heart pounding as though I had done something wrong. Sitting on my bed, I tried to shake off the memory of what had just happened. Was I overthinking it? Had it been an accident? The sensation from Ethan's pocket kept replaying in my mind, making my face flush. I wasn't sure what to think, but the shame refused to fade. I wondered if Daniel and Ethan would just laugh it off, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. Not because I had touched something inappropriate, but because I had crossed a line without realizing it. It was the first time I noticed that the boundary between us, which I had always assumed was unbreakable, was more fragile than I'd thought. Later that evening, after hiding in my room for a while, I decided to go downstairs. I was hungry and I knew my family was likely waiting for me. But I still felt embarrassed from earlier, unsure of whether Daniel and Ethan were thinking about what had happened. I told myself that maybe it wasn't as serious as I thought. Maybe they had forgotten. I quietly opened my door and tiptoed down the hallway, trying to avoid making eye contact with them. As I neared the living room, I paused to listen. It seemed empty, and I breathed a sigh of relief, assuming they were in the kitchen or elsewhere. When I entered the living room, I was surprised to find it completely empty. How strange, I thought, pausing by the sofa where I had sat earlier. Just as I was trying to figure out what channel was on, I heard voices behind me. "What are you doing, Olivia?" Ethan's voice rang out. I jumped in shock, and Daniel burst into laughter. "You look like a thief," Daniel teased. I screamed in surprise, turning around to see them both standing there. The suddenness of their appearance made my heart stop, and we all jumped at the same time. Ethan and Daniel laughed while I clutched my chest, both startled and amused. "You two scared me half to death," I exclaimed, trying to look mad but unable to hold back my laughter. "What about you? You look like you're up to something shady," Daniel teased, raising his eyebrows. Ethan patted my head playfully. "You're not planning on sneaking food, are you?" I laughed along with them, the awkwardness from earlier seeming to dissolve. I told myself that what I had touched couldn't have been what I thought it was. Otherwise, Daniel and Ethan wouldn't be laughing like this. That thought gave me some relief, and I tried to act like nothing had happened. I was just, checking to see if anyone was here, I said, trying to change the subject. "What are you two doing behind me? Were you trying to scare me?" Daniel shrugged, pretending to be serious. "Yeah, I just wanted to startle you a little, but I didn't expect you to jump so much." Ethan laughed. "Who would have thought you'd react like that? Your face was priceless." We all burst out laughing, the tension finally melting away. At that moment, Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "All right, let's go eat. The whole family's waiting for you." I nodded, smiling, and followed them into the kitchen, where the entire family had gathered. My parents greeted me warmly when they saw me. I sat down at the table, feeling at peace, the warm light surrounding us. During dinner, the conversation was filled with laughter. My parents talked about their work, and Daniel and Ethan occasionally teased me with light-hearted jokes. I joined in, and the earlier feelings of embarrassment slowly faded away. After dinner, I helped my mother clean up the dishes before heading to my room to prepare for bed. As I lay in bed that night, I thought back to the events of the afternoon. Although I was still a bit embarrassed about what had happened, I no longer felt anxious. I smiled to myself, reassuring myself that everything was going to be okay. Daniel and Ethan were still the best brothers I could ever have, and I fell asleep peacefully, convinced it was all behind me. But it wasn't. My room and theirs were separated by only a thin wall, and even the smallest sounds, whether from a movie or music, could easily pass through. One morning, as someone known for sleeping in late, I woke up at an unusually early hour, 7:00 a.m. At first I thought I had woken up from a dream I couldn't remember, or maybe the sunlight shining through the curtains had startled me. But as I became more alert, I realized there was an odd sound coming from the next room. My room was situated between Daniel's and Ethan's, and our house had been built in a traditional style with thin walls. If someone played music or watched TV loudly, the sounds could easily reach the other rooms. I was used to hearing Daniel and Ethan chatting or playing video games, but this morning the sound was different. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to catch my attention. At first, I assumed they were watching an action movie or something similar, but after a few minutes I began to feel that something was off. The sounds weren't like the usual background noise from a movie. They were intermittent, sometimes slow, sometimes quick. My heart started to race, and a thought crossed my mind that made my face flush with heat. I didn't want to believe it, but as the sound became clearer, I realized it wasn't music or normal conversation. It was a series of rapid, sensual sounds mixed with heavy breathing. My pulse quickened, and a wave of embarrassment washed over me. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping I was imagining things. Why was I awake to hear this? My body felt like it was on fire. I raised my hands to cover my face, trying to push the inappropriate thoughts out of my head. This is private, I told myself. I had never been in a situation like this before. We had always been so close, and I never imagined I would hear something like this coming from their room. The knowledge made my skin prickle with discomfort. I tried to ignore it. I pulled the blanket over my head, willing myself to block out the sound. But no matter how hard I tried, the noise seemed to stick to me, growing louder in my mind. I couldn't escape it. Finally, I sat up in bed, my chest tightening with anxiety. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't just lie there listening. The unease in my stomach made it impossible to stay still any longer. I quietly opened my door and tiptoed into the hallway, trying to make as little noise as possible. My breath felt unsteady as I crept forward. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became, until it felt like the walls no longer separated us. I hesitated outside their door, unsure of what to do next. My heart pounded. Embarrassment and confusion tangled in my thoughts. I knew this was something that everyone experiences at some point, but hearing it from Daniel and Ethan's room was different. It felt intrusive, wrong. I didn't know how to react. I bit my lip, debating whether to turn back or keep standing there. My fingers twitched at my sides as I hesitated. Without thinking, I pressed my ear against the door, trying to steady my breathing. The sound was clearer than ever, burning away all rational thoughts. I wanted to move, to leave, but I stood frozen, caught between curiosity and shame. I had never felt more uncertain in my life. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but another part was drawn in, unable to pull away from the sounds. Suddenly, the door opened, and I stepped back in shock. Ethan stood there, wide-eyed with surprise, as if he had just been caught doing something he shouldn't. I froze, unsure of what to say. We stared at each other in silence for what felt like forever. The air between us was thick, suffocating, making it hard to breathe. Ethan cleared his throat, attempting to break the tension. "Olivia, what are you doing standing here?" His voice was shaky, embarrassed, clearly trying to stay calm, but failing miserably. He scratched the back of his head, avoiding my gaze. His face was flushed, and I knew mine wasn't any better. My heart was racing, my body felt hot, and I lowered my head to avoid his eyes. I was just passing by, I murmured. The words were weak, but they were all I could manage in that moment. Just then, the sound inside the room stopped abruptly, and Daniel stepped out from behind Ethan. His expression mirrored Ethan's, red, awkward, and guilty. He glanced at me, but quickly looked away, unable to meet my eyes. We all stood there in silence, unsure of what to say. The tension was unbearable, and none of us knew how to break it. I gave a nervous smile, running my hand through my hair in an attempt to hide my discomfort. "I was just passing by," I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. "Nothing, I'm leaving." I turned quickly and rushed back to my room, desperate to escape the awkward situation as fast as I could. I could feel their eyes on me as I left, but I didn't look back. Once inside, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and I felt as if I had just witnessed something I shouldn't have. The embarrassment lingered, and I couldn't stop thinking about the moment. The way Ethan and Daniel had looked at me, the awkward silence that followed. It all replayed in my mind over and over. I tried to push the negative thoughts away, but the more I tried, the stronger they became. I kept telling myself it was just an unexpected situation, something none of us had meant to happen, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that things between us had changed forever. A short while later, there was a knock on my door. My heart sank. I knew it wasn't my parents. They usually just walked in when they needed something. That meant it could only be Daniel or Ethan. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves before opening the door. Ethan stood there, looking just as embarrassed as before. He avoided my gaze, his hands fidgeting awkwardly. "Olivia, I'm really sorry about what happened earlier," he said, his voice soft. "It's not what you think. We were just watching a movie and maybe the timing wasn't right." I hesitated, watching him carefully. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. A moment later, Daniel stepped into the doorway behind him. He looked just as uncomfortable, his eyes darting between me and Ethan as if searching for the right words. No one spoke for a few moments. The silence was thick again, and I knew we were all trying to figure out how to move past this. I realized that if this awkwardness continued, it would only make things worse, so I decided to break the silence. I smiled awkwardly, trying to act casual despite the tension. "Come on." "I didn't mean it," I said. "Don't look so tense. I was just passing by, really." Daniel and Daniel exchanged a glance as if silently communicating after a brief pause. Daniel let out a sigh, his smile returning slightly. "Really, Olivia, you're okay with this? You're not uncomfortable?" I quickly nodded, trying to reassure them both. "Yeah, I'm fine. Honestly, I think we're all just a little awkward about it." Then, to make things easier, I suggested, "How about the three of us sit down and talk? Maybe it'll help us clear the air." Both Ethan and Daniel seemed surprised by my offer, but after a moment of hesitation, they both agreed. We went into my room and I sat down on the bed. I decided to make a joke to ease the tension. I looked at Ethan and teased, "So the movie was so good, you both forgot about the time Ethan laughed awkwardly and covered his face with his hands?" I raised my eyebrows playfully. "I thought you guys turned it up so I could hear We both laughed, and the awkwardness melted away after a while. My curiosity got the best of me, and I glanced at Ethan and Daniel, wondering if I should say what had crossed my mind. After a brief moment of hesitation, I gathered the courage to speak. "How about we try something like in the movie?" The words came out before I could stop myself. I wasn't sure how they would react, but I felt a surge of curiosity that I couldn't ignore. Ethan and Daniel looked at me in surprise. "Are you serious?" Daniel asked, his voice full of confusion. I nodded, trying to keep my expression serious. "I was just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, right?" I said softly, not daring to look at them directly. "No way," Ethan replied, immediately shaking. His head firmly, they both turned away, clearly uncomfortable, but I wasn't ready to give up. I squeezed both of their hands to reassure them, and myself. "Just try it once. I want to know what it feels like." After a long silence, Daniel sighed and finally spoke. "Okay, but just this once, and we keep it a secret, no one can know." His voice was low, emphasizing the importance of the boundaries. The room was quiet except for our breathing. My heart raced as we began each movement, careful yet full of intensity. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but it felt like everything in the world had faded away, leaving only us when it was over. The sunlight streamed through the room, and there was a peaceful silence. We didn't speak, just lay next to each other, breathing evenly. The tension that I had feared was gone, replaced by an even deeper connection. We headed to the kitchen together to prepare lunch, and everything felt unexpectedly natural, like nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew that the boundary between us had shifted as we sat down to eat. Daniel smiled at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, returning the smile. "I'm fine. And I think I love you both even more now." I blushed at my words, but they just held my hand, smiling at me with warmth and affection. "You too," they said. And so we continued our meal, knowing that our relationship had changed, but there was no regret, only a deeper bond, one that would remain unspoken but clear between us from that day on. Everything felt different, but in a subtle way. Our relationship, once pure and simple, had now crossed an invisible line. The intimacy we shared before had evolved into something more complex. Every time we looked into each other's eyes, there was a new understanding, a deeper connection that hadn't been there before. We didn't talk about it, but we knew the unspoken bond was there, shifting the dynamics between us in ways we couldn't easily explain. But while the change in our relationship was undeniable, deep down I knew it wasn't right. What we had done, the boundary we had crossed, was wrong. We had given in to youthful curiosity, and while it brought us closer in some ways, it also left a mark on my conscience. I couldn't ignore the fact that we had broken some fundamental rules. Even if it was unintentional, our actions had altered the way I saw the world, and it weighed heavily on me sometimes. I still feel the anxiety creeping in when I think back to that moment. The awkwardness hasn't completely disappeared. Whenever I look at Ethan or Daniel, I can sense the change in the air, an unspoken tension that lingers just beneath the surface. We never talked about what happened again, almost as if it was a silent agreement to forget it and move forward. but the way they treat me now is different. They're more careful, gentler in their actions, as though they're afraid to hurt me, even though I know they love me. As for me, I can't help but feel my heart race every time I meet their eyes. There's a mixture of excitement and anxiety, a feeling I've never had before. The curiosity of youth led us down this path, one that was filled with emotions we weren't ready to handle. Our connection is stronger, but it's also more complicated, and I know deep down things will never be the same again. Looking back, I realize how impulsive and immature I was. Our actions, guided by curiosity and emotion, were not the same. Crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I don't regret it, but I also can't deny the lingering feeling of guilt and confusion. It haunts me, reminding me that curiosity can sometimes lead us down dangerous paths. We may not have intended for things to happen the way they did, but they did, and now we're left to deal with the consequences through this experience. I've learned an important lesson. Curiosity, while natural, is not always worth satisfying, especially when it threatens the integrity of relationships and the boundaries that protect us. Life's boundaries aren't there to restrict us. They exist to protect us from making decisions we may regret. Sometimes holding back and staying grounded is the best choice. So, to anyone reading this, I want to offer a piece of advice. Don't let temporary curiosity lead you into making decisions that could ruin the relationships you hold dear before acting on strong emotions. Stop and think about the long-term consequences. Emotions, especially strong ones, are often fleeting, but the consequences they bring can last a lifetime. Cherish the relationships you have and respect the boundaries that come with them. True love, the kind that lasts, doesn't require impulsive actions to prove its strength. It's built on trust, respect, understanding, and responsibility. That's the most important lesson I've learned.